We're going to be talking about how online learning is disruptive. What do I mean when I say disruptive? What is a disruptive innovation? A disruptive innovation is a process in which products or solutions get their foothold in simple applications at the bottom of the market. And then they get better and better over time, this relentless march up market until eventually they displace established competitors. How do they get their foothold at the low end in simple applications? It's by offering a new value proposition like simplicity, convenience, affordability, or accessibility to those who are overserved by the incumbent technology or who have no access to the incumbent technology, who are what we would call non-consumers. They aren't participating at all because they have no way to access that product or solution. And so disruptions get their start there and then get better and better over time until they've transformed the sector. What does that mean in real life? Scroll to the next slide, to the computers. So in the mainframe computer industry, when the first computers came about, they were mainframe computers. They were $2 million machines. They would have filled up this whole room, and only those with the most expertise and wealth could afford a mainframe computer. And so really it was the large organizations and companies that had a mainframe computer. And if you wanted to have your data set processed, you'd have to take it in to some PhDs or engineers to run that data set for you. Now enter the first wave of disruptive innovation. It was the mini computer. These were more like $200,000, not $2 million. They were still 1,600 pounds, but they were like the size of a filing cabinet. So smaller organizations and institutions and companies could have a mini computer. They weren't as good as the mainframe computers originally, but they were better than nothing. And so they allowed access and affordability. Now the major wave of disruption entered in the late 70s, early 80s with the personal computer. It was so inferior relative to a mini computer that really the mini computer makers like Digital Equipment Corporation didn't really pay attention to it. And companies like Apple launched it as a toy for children and for hobbyists, who were really delighted by it because it was better than nothing. And so it got its start serving non-consumers with a simpler, more convenient, accessible, and affordable solution. And then it got better and better over time, until eventually it could do everything and more that we would ever need from a mainframe or mini computer. And so those with less wealth and expertise were now able to access it, which is a really interesting reason behind disruptive innovation. It can be a positive force, bringing solutions to those without as much wealth and expertise. That's a classic example of a disruptive innovation. Wiped out the mainframe and mini computer sectors. Next slide. We see disruptive innovation in the automobile sector. When Toyota wanted to enter the American automobile sector, it did something very clever, whether knowingly or not. And that's that it came in with a disruptive entrant, the Corona. Has anyone ever heard of the Corona? It was this crummy little subcompact. And it was actually the butt of all of the jokes of the day. And occasionally, Ford or GM would compete by throwing down a Chevette or a Pinto, but it was only half-hearted because why compete really hard for the Corona market when they had the luxury of charging premium prices for an even better Ford Explorer or Cadillac Escalade? And so you see them serving their customers even better through more sustaining innovations. And meanwhile, this disruptive, messy entrant got its start. And then that Corona became the Tercel, and then the Camry, and then the Avalon, and then the 4Runner, and then the Lexus. And you can see that relentless march up market until Toyota put big pressure on the big three automobile makers. Now, who is disrupting Toyota today? Not Tesla. We'll talk about Tesla in the next module when we talk about hybrids. Any examples? It would really be the Koreans with the Hyundai and the Kia. And then we can see the Chinese on the horizon with the Chery. And so we see that march up market, while the low end, there's something really messy and beautiful happening. Next slide. Let's talk about the disruption of retailing. So in 1960, there were 316 full-service department stores like Macy's. In 1962, the first disruptive entrants emerged, like Kmart, Walmart, Target, Corvette, Woolco. And look, their product selection wasn't as good, and maybe they couldn't offer the full cosmetics counter of a Macy's, but they were more convenient and affordable and accessible, a little bit easier to park and get in than to go all the way through the mall. And so they got their start there. And then you can see what's happened over time. Now jump forward about 54 or so years to where we are today. How many of those full service department stores of the 316 are left? Fewer than 10, like 6 to 8. In disruptive battles, the entrants always win. And so we've seen that with discount retailing. Now who's putting pressure in disruptively on the discount retailers today? Amazon, it's the online retailers. In fact, we all just got through Cyber Weekend. And do you know that over Cyber Weekend, so that's Black Friday through Cyber Monday, Amazon claimed 31% of online sales. It's quite phenomenal. And also the dollar stores. Next slide. So my son, who really likes Minecraft, I think trying to speak to me in a language that he knows his nerdy mom will understand. He says, look, Mom, I should be able to play Minecraft because it's so disruptive compared to Legos. And I'm like, son, you do have a point there. Because in fact, if you look at Legos, there's a lot of kids that just don't have access to a $100 set of 50 bricks, or who couldn't bring the Legos with them in the car for their long drive to school, or on the bus, or on an airplane. But Minecraft can fit in their pocket, and it's better than nothing. Simpler, certainly less expensive, and then you see it getting better and better over time until Legos, I think they've noticed. At least we've seen the Minecraft edition of Legos, which shows that they're seeing something happening here. It's an example of a hybrid that you'll learn more about later. Next slide. My message for you today is that online learning is following that same pattern of a disruptive innovation. Why is that true? Well, first of all, remember the pattern. Disruptive innovations get their start serving non-consumers. And if you reflect about your schools and districts, where have you really seen online learning emerge? It was probably dropout recovery, credit recovery, offering advanced placement courses or electives to kids who otherwise wouldn't have had access to them, summer school, snow days, incarcerated youth. Those are all places where we've really seen the early growth of online learning when maybe it wasn't that great yet, but it was better than nothing. Next slide. Disruptive innovations follow this S-curve pattern where they prototype and creep into the sector slowly until they hit an inflection point and they take off until eventually they've saturated the market. And we've really seen that to be the case with online learning, where at first it was the early prototyping, and now we're on that S-curve inflection where we can predict out, if you linearize that S-curve, we can predict out that by 2019, 50% of high school courses will be online in some form or fashion. It's quite a striking prediction. The train has already left the station, folks. We are already well on our way to having online learning changing the way the world learns and the way our schools work. And it's because this disruption is on that point in the S-curve. The next slide. Disruptive innovations tend to improve over time, and we've seen that with online learning as well. We've seen the platforms improve. We've seen our devices improve. We've seen our pedagogy improve. We've seen content improve in some cases, not always. There are still certainly those teachers who are just digitizing their PDFs. But we are seeing some places where the content is becoming more adaptive and engaging. We're seeing that happening. And now the last slide. The main way that we're seeing online learning improve over time is that it's blending into brick and mortar schools to serve more and more students. It's starting to serve students who need to come to school. We maybe originally, a while ago, thought of online learning as a purely virtual phenomenon, and not anymore. Now, why is that? Now, stepping back, the Christensen Institute did an S-curve analysis of homeschooling. Homeschooling appears to be plateauing out at about 10% of the market, which means that 90% of kids or more will continue to come to school, to a brick and mortar school. Which makes sense because we know that schools offer hot lunches and adult supervision and someone to love on our kids and to care for them and to supervise them. They do a lot of things besides just deliver content and instruction. And so for students to be able to enjoy online learning and the benefits that it can bring while continuing to have all of the accoutrements of a brick and mortar experience, we're really seeing online learning blending into schools. The reason why this message is so important is because if we can identify that online learning is appearing as a disruptive innovation, then we can predict that it will change and transform our sector, that it will change the way the world learns, as other disruptive innovations have in other sectors. It's also a big moment for us because we haven't had a disruptive technology in education since the arrival of the printing press. That's how long it's been since we've really had a disruptive technology that allows us to vastly make education more affordable, more convenient, more accessible for people for whom it was prior out of reach. And that's why this moment is really different from other moments in education. What's a sustaining innovation? A sustaining innovation is an innovation that serves our existing customers even better. So when that Corona became the Tercel and the Camry and the Avalon, it was serving existing users even better, charging better and better prices for existing. We've seen sustaining innovations in education. As that chalkboard has moved to the whiteboard and then the electronic smartboard, as professional development has improved, as our textbooks have gotten better, as our standards have gotten better, all sorts of things. Any of those are sustaining innovations, and we've been good at sustaining innovation in education. We just haven't had an example of disruptive innovation. Can you think of example of disruptive innovation outside of the education sector? Here's one for you. Let's talk about Blockbuster. Do you remember in the early days when it used to be that we'd always go to Blockbuster or a video store to rent our movies? And it was great because there was popcorn and there was candy you could get and you could see all of the videos stacked up next to each other, and there were some real benefits to that. But when disruptive entrants like Netflix came along, they had some value. I mean, on a cold day, you might have been a non-consumer. I'm not gonna get out in my car and go to Blockbuster, and it was really better than nothing, your simple subscription to Netflix for whatever their selection was at the time. And then you see companies like Netflix and Amazon Prime getting better and better. So we have more of a selection now, and really a lot of the benefits that the Blockbuster used to offer. And what's happened to the old incumbents? In those disruptive battles, the entrants tend to win, and we've certainly seen that to be the case with Blockbuster. We've seen a similar phenomenon with the music industry, as it has been transformed by new models that allow us to consume music very differently from when we used to go in and buy a CD at a CD music shop. Can you think of any other examples? The fast food market, well, when it first came on board, I would say the fast food market was disruptive relative to traditional restaurants, because it certainly wasn't the premium service or selection that you would expect at a sit-down restaurant. And people would say, yeah, that is a crummy alternative to what I would be interested in. But for those who didn't have time to sit down at a full restaurant, or who didn't have the money to afford that kind of service and being waited on at a table, it was better than nothing. And so you see companies like McDonald's coming in, and in their day, that was transformative to the restaurant industry. Certainly, great example. Cell phones. The iPhone has been disruptive relative to the laptop. And that's because the iPhone became good enough that it was able to substitute for a personal computer for those who otherwise were non-consumers because they either couldn't carry their laptop around with them, they couldn't afford a laptop, or it was too inconvenient to have that laptop technology. And so I would say the iPhone was really the moment when that disruption took off with mobile devices starting to displace and disrupt personal computers in the way that we thought of them with laptops and desktops. Absolutely. But now you also see, and that's it. Good job. Thank you, everybody.